Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm really excited to share this project with you. I know this is a 3D printing channel, but this project does not have any 3D prints, but it does go with our Assassin's Creed Valhalla axes that we made last week.
Invincible.
This whole project is made from wood, EVA foam, styrofoam, and Googly eyes! I've been having a lot of fun with these giant googly eyes lately. I've been just putting them on random things throughout the house to make them look alive, and it actually really does make them come to life. I'll show you at the end of the video. So for this project, I just went to the local hardware store, Home Depot we have, and I bought the cheapest 1x4s that I could find. Now fortunately these 1x4s were long enough that I only needed to buy 4 of them, and then I measured them out, cut them in half, and laid them all out. Initially, I tried running a smaller piece of wood on the back and nailing all the boards together. It did not hold up the way that I thought it was, and it actually fell apart the moment that I picked it up. So that didn't quite work out. And hello, little spider friend. So I ended up going with wood glue, and I glued each board together one at a time, and then I glued the 2 supporting back boards on there as well. And then I put a 45-pound weight over the top of them to let them hold and dry for a full 24 hours before I even attempted to touch it, because I really didn't want it to fall apart. Once that was done, I just made a compass using some twine and a rope. I have a 22-inch diameter for this shield. Now, real Viking shields were much bigger than this, but as I looked at the trailer, I just kind of measured that this shield went a little more than his shoulder width. So maybe he's a really, really huge guy, but I wanted it to be fit for my body, the right sizing, so I just went a little more than 22 inches. And then I just took my saw and cut out around the shield. Once that was done, I needed a small hole on the inside of the shield so that my hand could go back there and fit in there just like this. So I just used a drill to drill a hole in there to get my saw blade to fit inside to do that smaller hole in the middle. Once I was done cutting and gluing the shield together, I decided to stain it in the darkest stain that I could find. Now, in the small can, of course. I didn't want to buy a huge can and just have tons of wood stain left over. So it wasn't quite black, but it was pretty dark. So I stained the whole thing. I let it dry for 4 hours, stained it again, let it dry for 4 hours, and then we were ready for the paints. So we went with just acrylic white paint and acrylic blue paint. Now the key to this, to kind of keep that wood grainy texture, was to do a dry brush. So I took sponge brushes, barely had any paints on them at all, and just lightly stroked the wood so that way it wouldn't really cover up that much grain. Now, one thing that you can do, and one thing that I ended up doing a little bit in some spots, was taking 500 grit sandpaper and just lightly sanding some of the paint off, especially the paint that was here in the middle, because just to give it a kind of a little bit of a smoother look. Once I was done painting, I decided to go with this middle piece. Now the middle piece is just a styrofoam sphere that I found at Michael's. I cut that sphere in half and I laid it on top of a round piece of EVA foam. And normally when I'm prepping my EVA foam, I use something called Plasti-Dip. It's just you spray over it and then you can paint on top of your foam. I didn't know how that would work on this styrofoam, so what I decided to do was use a Modge Podge, and I Modge Podged the entire styrofoam to kind of create a nice seal around it, and then I Plasti-Dipped on top of that. But while I was using the Modge Podge, I saw in a couple scenes and a couple reference photos that they had the Assassin's Creed logo on top of the middle of the shield, and I thought, oh man, that'd be really awesome to have. I don't want it to stick out very much, that's why I didn't paint it a different color, but it's just like a subtle hint or subtle reference. So for this, I used 2mm EVA foam, and I just went and printed out a reference picture online. I put it on top of the foam that I liked that would fit on top of the middle piece of styrofoam here. And I scored in these lines with a razor. I'll show you up close. And initially when you score those lines, you can't really see that, but once you take a heat gun to the foam, it expands those lines, and then you can see all of the detail on top of the little axe here. So I put Modge Podge all over the top of it to kind of help it blend as well. Before I did that though, I actually took scissors and I really tried to battle damage the inside of this so it looks like it's taken a couple hits in battle. I didn't want it to be perfectly round. You can see here on the bottom of the axe, we have some big grooves here and there, and then it was ready. At the time, I also decided to use these googly eyes to make the rivets. So they are really just small googly eyes. I use the Modge Podge to hold them together because Modge Podge is basically like watered down glue. So with the Modge Podge over it, and then once everything was done in Modge Podge, I decided to hit it with one coat of Plasti Dip to give it a black look. Then, again, I did the same thing. This is all EVA foam around the outside of this. I measured it, I cut it out, I used contact cement to adhere it. Contact cement's very easy to use. You put it on the foam, you put it on the wood, you let it dry for about 10 minutes each, and then it just sticks right on the top of there. And it is a pretty good stick. I cannot pull this up in really any of these places. I did Plasti Dip this first before I put it on, and then I used Modge Podge again to hold down these the bolts or the googly eyes for this. And then I went one layer of Modge Podge again and a really thick layer and kind of just drizzled it on and sponged it on to give it that hammered metal look. I didn't want it to be extremely flat around the outside if the inside is so battle damaged and worn. Once that was done, I just took the same paint that I used for my axes and I did a very, very, very light sponge brush over the top of it to give it that metalled hammer look. Then the last thing that we did was put on these crows. So I found a reference picture online. I printed it out in a PDF version, the poster version, make it really, really big. I actually had to do it twice because the first one I did was way too big, and then we sized it down, and then we used that as a stencil to put the birds on, or the crows on, and then we just filled it in with a black acrylic paint. Now, I thought about going over the birds with the 500 grit sandpaper to kind of give it that worn look, but I just liked the birds so much and so how sharp they came out that I decided not to do that. But again, if you're building this, you can do it however you want to do it, and I hope some of these ideas helped you out. And that was pretty much it for this build. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer them, but I will see you guys next week.